So it's a couple minutes past the hour. I'd love to begin. My name is Andrea. I'm with Inspira Advantage. I will be your host this evening. I have a wonderful panelist here as well. I'm going to pin her video for everyone. I'll let her introduce herself momentarily. So tonight's webinar, again, thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. The topic is how to score 515 plus on the MCAT. So before I go any further, I do have a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. In terms of how long this webinar is run for, we're looking at, excuse me, I'm just getting over being sick, so pardon my voice, but we're looking at running this webinar for about 45 minutes. We like to do 30 minutes of content where we really sort of talk about, in this case, we'd be speaking about proven study techniques, time management strategies, content mastery, and overcoming test anxiety. So once we kind of get through the meat and potatoes, we'll then leave about 15 minutes towards the end. It's okay if we go a little bit over time for a Q&A. So we encourage you throughout the course of this webinar to pop the questions in the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll make sure that we get to them. So we'll have two separate Q&A times. One is sort of halfway through the webinar, and then the other half is towards the end. So we definitely encourage you to do that. Additionally, we are recording this webinar, and everyone on this team, everyone, all the members, whether they're attending live or later on, will receive a recording as well. So who are we? So before I kind of pass it over to our panelist to introduce herself, I'm excited to share a little bit about who we are and what we offer at Inspira and sort of what makes us the leaders within this industry and why we're qualified to go over this topic. So we're a globally recognized admissions consulting firm and test prep firm with 15 years of experience. We specialize in guiding students through the complex and competitive process of applying to graduate schools in healthcare fields, including medicine, residency, dental, veterinary, physician's assistant, and nursing programs. With a 94% acceptance rate, we maximize an applicant's chances of getting into the world's most competitive programs. We firmly believe in starting the candidacy development process as early as possible. For our college freshmen, we offer pre-health advising and profile development. Together, we build a timeline and plan for the years leading up to applying and help walk the students through every step of the process. We start with a complete academic advising, so we look into course selection and GPA strategy. Next, we want to help students get involved in the right experiences in order to help differentiate their profile and become a top applicant, which is evidently what every student wants. This includes finding and applying to research engagements, shadowing opportunities, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, student clubs and organizations, extracurriculars, leadership roles, and clinical experiences. Our goal is to help students gain a strong foundation and understand what admissions are actually looking for while building a portfolio that sets them apart from other applicants. While our counselors support students in building their profiles, we have a team of tutors who work closely with them to provide personalized one-on-one tutoring. Students do take an official diagnostic test before starting, so tutors are then able to assess their strengths and their weaknesses. This helps create a customized study plan structure for the days, weeks, and months ahead. We tailor our approach to each student's unique needs and schedule, providing the right assessments and lessons. They become familiar with the test's content, strategies, and format. Interim tests monitor and track progress, allowing us to modify study schedules and build an upward trend leading to the official test date. Our MCAT students see an average of a 15-point increase for 45 plus hours of tutoring, and we actually offer a 515 score guarantee for the MCAT. Once we've helped build and shape an outstanding candidate, we continue working to help create a perfect application. What does this look like? Well, our program starts with a detailed profile analysis, diving deep into the student's stats and experiences. This foundation helps to create a unique story and application narrative and guides the creation of a well-balanced list of reach, target, and safety schools. Our admissions counselors, who are also essay writing experts, will brainstorm, outline, and edit your personal statements and supplemental essays until they are perfect. These essays showcase the best aspect of our students. Whether it's the main application or scholarship essays, we offer unlimited edits. Overall, our goal is to build the most competitive candidate and application. We use every tool in our skill set to ensure the products we create with students stand out from the rest of the pack. With that being said, I know you're not here to hear me jabber on all night long. I will pass it over to our panelist to introduce herself and go on with the rest of the webinar.
Hey guys, I'm a fourth year MD PhD student at the Yale School of Medicine. I've also been an admissions counselor with Inspira for the last 2 years, and I'm currently studying immunology. Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about proven study techniques. So spaced repetition is something that you're also going to hear a lot when you enter into med school. So I really recommend something like this for all the memorization heavy parts of the exam, especially for the psychosocial part of the exam. So you want to break up your study sessions into smaller space intervals over time, and you want to make sure that you're regularly reviewing material. So I would keep like a spreadsheet of all the questions that you got wrong and like all the topics that you missed the first time, and I would keep a log of that and then come back to that every like week or so. So you're looking at it, and then as time goes on, you might notice that you forget that again, and you want to make sure that you are getting that in each pass through. And that improves your retention over time. Next, active recall is also really important. So you want to make the what we mean by this is basically if you are using a flashcard, right? Eventually you're going to like remember what the answer to that specific question is, and it won't be as strong of an actual trigger for you moving forward. So you want to make sure that you're testing material without looking at notes, that you're like looking at this material in a new way. Whether that's going through a Kaplan study book at first, studying with your admissions counselor next, or seeing that topic again in a practice test, the way that you're recalling that information is really important. And ultimately, that's going to help strengthen your memory and boost your understanding through active engagement. And then finally, one of the most important things that you can do is take lots of practice exams. So that helps you actually apply the knowledge that you learned and build familiarity with the exam format. One of the worst parts about the MCAT is just sitting there for 4 hours, especially at the end of the car section, as a lot of you guys might have experienced already. You start getting tired. So preparing for the actual like length of the exam is also really important. And on top of that, practice exams help you identify knowledge gaps and areas where you still need improvement. And then they also help build your endurance and your confidence. Once you nail a couple of practice tests, you'll feel more comfortable when you do the real thing. So some important time management strategies. You only have 1 to 2 minutes for each question on the exam. So you want to make sure that if you are stuck on a really hard passage, that you give it your best go, and then you just move on instead of getting like stuck in one portion of the exam and running out of time for parts of the exam that might be easier for you. And like I mentioned earlier, each question is worth the same. So you want to try to focus on easier questions first. So if you are stuck on a really hard passage and it looks really hard in the beginning, skip it, do other ones, build up your confidence, and then come back to that passage with whatever time you have left at the end of your section. One trap that I would fall into when I started my MCAT preparation is that I would waste a lot of time like double checking things that were probably already right. So try to make sure you look through the entire section without getting bogged down in any one area of the test.
Awesome. So I want to do just a quick check-in. I don't see any questions in the chat thus far, which is totally okay. But again, we want to make sure that we provide you with as much information as possible. So whether you have questions about the MCAT, whether you have questions about the application process, this is really your time to pick our brains on anything related to the med school application process. So please don't be shy, get those questions in, and we will make sure to respond to them one way or another.
Okay, so starting off with content mastery, there are a few exams that are more likely to show up on the test than others. So you want to make sure that you cover all these high yield concepts. So some of the concepts that are really likely to show up are enzyme kinetics, molecular biology, and organic reaction mechanisms. And so you might have a really difficult biology question or a difficult chem physics passage, but it all boils down to things that you've seen before and can apply easily in that section. Cars is something that just requires a lot of practice and a lot of getting used to how some of these questions are phrased. And you'll notice the more practice you do, the more familiarity you'll build with the types of questions that they ask. So some really important things to recognize on the car section of the exam is being able to identify tone, purpose, and how authors use evidence to build arguments, especially the last part. You want to make sure that you can go back to the passage and highlight exactly what evidence supports whatever argument they're asking about in the question. And then on top of that, they usually tend to use extremely boring passages in the car section to slow you down and make it feel more difficult. So getting used to reading passages that might not be that interesting or difficult to read will help you on your test day. So next we're going to talk about mastering psychological, social, and biological foundations. So you want to go beyond memorization whenever you can, especially for like the chemistry portion of the exam or the biology portion of the exam, or virtually any of them. So the less that you feel like you have to like cram inside and look over before your test day, the better. So focus on passage-based questions to integrate all the information that you've learned together. So you want to integrate stuff from the social section with biological data and use real-world examples whenever you can to help you solidify those concepts. And then once you feel like you've built the foundations for each of these sections, once you feel that your critical knowledge has a strong base, I would recommend that you stop studying content only and try to switch to doing as many practice problems as possible. First of all, because even though you might know these concepts on a fundamental level, sometimes when they're phrased in a passage, they feel different. And so it might be some sort of physics topic that you already feel like you understand. Like let's say you've like already studied refraction in school, but the way that that knowledge will be tested on the exam can be like roundabout. Maybe you didn't recognize that that's what they were asking for. Maybe you didn't know where to get the parts of the different components that you need to solve the problem for from the passage. So there's also a big like reading comprehension part of this that goes along with just the content review. So you want to make sure that you understand how experiments are designed and you understand how to interpret data. That was something that I found really difficult when I first started the biological science sectioning or studying for that section of the exam because I was a chemistry major in college. So it was just I just wasn't used to looking at biology experiments, and so that took some time for me to like practice and learn how to get that from the passage. And so sometimes you might even have questions that are across disciplines. It starts off with a combined chemistry and physics section, and sometimes you guys will see I suck at physics. Sometimes whenever I had a test that was way heavier on physics than chemistry, that was difficult for me, or sometimes all those things are like combined together. So doing lots of practice exams, I think, is a good way to get around that problem. And then also another important part of this exam is overcoming test anxiety. This is something that I found really difficult. I think especially when you feel like there's a lot writing on one exam, it's hard to stay calm during. And I have many anxious tendencies, and I did lots of things on my exam day that I wouldn't recommend that you guys do. It was really hard for me to get some sleep, and I was studying the morning of the exam, which didn't make a difference. difference. So try to practice different things that help you stay calm. It doesn't need to be mindfulness and breathing techniques. Those things might work for some people and might not work for others. So if it's calling a friend or your parents the morning before the exam, that was something that I found really helpful and helped me calm down. Also having like data for yourself that you've done this many practice tests and you've gotten this score this many times, and you probably will get a similar score on test day, I think is a good idea. Make sure you simulate test day conditions as closely as you can. So even though it might be tempting to pause during your practice test or look something up, you want to prepare for the anxiety of not knowing what your score will be, just like you won't know on test day. If you have, if you're like me and whenever you get stressed, you feel like you need to study for this many hours every single day, check in with yourself, make sure that you're not burnt out. If you need a break, take entire day off, and just do things that help you relax, because being confident on test day is half the battle. And then another way to build your confidence is just by practicing consistently. And if there's something that you think is really tough, eventually mastering it and getting better is the best way to feel confident on test day. Um, so we talked a little bit about building a study schedule already. Creating a sustainable routine is really important. You will take really, really long and hard tests in med school. The step exams are pretty brutal, and I have some friends that would wake up at 3:45 before their surgery rotation to study for step one, and that's just like something that I could never do. So there are going to be a lot of study plans that you can find online, and some of them might not work for you. Some of them might be like too intense. Some of them might be focusing on study strategies that are not for you. So make sure that the study schedule that you come up with is consistent, but also has regular breaks and has time for you to go back and review the content that you've missed before. And if you're having a really crappy day and you know that you're not going to get any effective studying done, I would really urge you to take a break and then come back when you're like focused and ready to go. Um, because this is really a marathon and not a race. And then talking about using practice tests effectively. So if you can take it in a library or someplace that's not as comfortable as like your desk at home or something like that, I would recommend that. Make sure that you take it under time conditions. So no extra bathroom breaks where you can't have a bathroom break, or no giving yourself another 10 minutes for this section of the exam when you know you won't be able to get more time the day of the exam. This was something that I kind of struggled with when I was studying for the MCAT. Staying honest will help you in the long run. And then reviewing your exam when you're done with it also really sucks because you just got done taking a 4-hour exam. But you want to make sure you like think through how you answered those questions, and if there's a concept problem that you had, or if you're just having trouble like reading and analyzing the passage. And I think that can help you direct your like future studying. So whether or not you have to go back and learn that concept, or whether or not you should maybe try to practice looking at experimental data or reading this kind of passage. And that can help direct your study plan moving forward. And so the more you practice under real day conditions, the more prepared you'll be for the actual test, and that'll help your overall performance. Taking a test in a Pearson study room is not that comfortable. There's going to be lots of other people there that are all taking different exams, and it is they will completely like pat you down and even check your glasses the day of the test. So it is kind of uncomfortable when you have your real day test experience. So being prepared for that, and being honest with yourself and testing yourself under real day conditions is really important. So for strengthening your weak areas, We talked about a few different ways that you might have a tough time during the MCAT. So one of those ways is identifying knowledge gaps. So if there is a pattern in the questions you're missing, let's say that they're all related to one topic, you know that you can go back to that area, review it again, and do more practice problems in that area, and then go back and see if that helps your overall score. And if you are an amazing chemist, but not that great in biology, or let's say you know a ton about psychology and not a lot on cars, it can feel good to keep doing sections that make you feel good and like make you feel like you're on top of it, but make sure you dedicate more time to subjects where your performance is weaker. Some people also like to study in different ways. So if you learn better from videos, use that. If you learn better from flashcards, use Anki. Anki is a really great resource and is really good at spaced repetition. And if you like reading, use a textbook. You don't have to use what other people have recommended online. You can always use the format that best fits your particular needs. And the main thing here is being consistent and thorough and keeping up with your study goals each day. And then building endurance for exam day. You just have to remember that you have to sit for this 4 or 5 hour exam, and you have to be able to focus for that long. I have suffered from like TikTok rot brain over the last couple of years. So making sure that you increase your study time and the duration that you're studying as you get closer to the exam day is really important. And that helps build your stamina and prepares you for taking a really long and hard exam. And then when you take a practice test, make sure that it's a full-length time practice test to help simulate real exam conditions. So you might nail the content part of the exam, you might nail how to read the passage, but you might struggle with spending too much time on a particular question. So that's also another part of your test reviewing strategy. And then staying motivated during MCAT prep. You need to make sure that you're maintaining your focus and discipline. So set small, achievable goals throughout your study process to keep yourself motivated. And then if there's something that you really like, try to reward yourself after reaching certain milestones so you can make sure that you stay on track. And then how should you review your practice tests? I would go through the test questions that you got right pretty quickly. I would take your results. If you got that question right and you feel like you understood the content and it wasn't a complete guess, just move on, because I feel like reviewing your practice test is one of like the hardest parts of MCAT studying, honestly. And then if there's a question that you got wrong, assess if it's a time issue, if it was a comprehension issue, or if it's a content issue, and then keep a spreadsheet with that entire log. Copy the question, copy your answer, copy the correct answer, and copy what you think went wrong, and try to keep a log moving forward. And then taking the results of your practice exam, try to use that feedback to focus on which areas you need more help with. And if it gets to a point where you already know all the content and it's just time or it's just reading comprehension, you can stop with content altogether and focus on doing as many practice problems as possible. And then track your progress through time. And if you feel like you've gone stagnant, it's okay to give yourself more time or adjust your MCAT test date and make sure that you're progressing before you actually sit down to take it. And some practical prep tips before test day. Establish as much of a consistent routine as possible. I would really recommend adjusting your sleep schedule for at least a couple of weeks before the exam. Try to get sleepy ahead of time if you can. Try to get used to waking up a couple of hours before your test date, because you're going to feel more anxious and more amped up the night before the actual test. So the more that you can fit it into your regular schedule, the better. You want to, like we've said a couple of times already, you want to take practice tests under timed conditions. So you know on test day, I only have a minute and this many seconds to look at this question. So when it's over, or once I finished spending 5 to 10 minutes on this passage, I have to move on. And then also, like we've mentioned a few times, make sure you prioritize rest to avoid burnout. And like I said, if you need to move your test date, I moved my MCAT test date the first time, and then did really well when I was ready to take it. So prioritize taking a break if you need it. So some strategic tips for test day success. Start with confidence. If there's a passage that you are really not familiar with if there's a passage you're really not familiar with, skip it and come back to it later, and do questions that you're familiar with first to build some momentum. If you do have some extra time, like let's say you went through a passage really quickly and you need a small break, take 30 seconds, take a minute or two to regroup, and then focus on the next passage. Or in between sections, try to like clear your head if you can, and like really relax before it's time to get into the next one. Monitor your timing. I would check the time before each passage you do. I would estimate about how much time you have to do that passage, and like a minute or two before that time is over, just select the best answers you can, flag it, and then come back to it at the end if you have extra time. And don't rush either. So you want to make sure the more that you can minimize double checking your answers, the better. So the more you can just dedicate the amount of time you need to answering that question instead of trying to rush through them all and then review them again before the end, the better. Because you don't have enough time to double check all of your answers. So I would prioritize the ones that you know are right, just move on from those and just take a second look at ones that you're really unsure about if you have extra time at the end. Some common pitfalls to avoid. Overemphasizing memorization at the expense of understanding. If you actually know how these different concepts work, it'll be easier for you to perform well on exam day, and then just cram in the TCA cycle that you know that there's no way for you to like truly understand beforehand. And then all the memorization heavy things will require a lot of spaced repetition and a lot of repeating throughout your study schedule. So the more that you can just know that you understand, the better. Next is neglecting timed practice. So the more you're like, oh, I just need to like review all the content. And if I know all the content, then I'll be ready on test day, is not the way to go. You want to make sure that you're able to apply everything that you know in the amount of time that you have on the test. And then lastly is skipping rest day. So it might feel really appealing to be like, oh, I'm just going to study every single day, and then I know that I did everything that I can up to the exam. But if you're not being efficient and productive during the days that you're studying, you're hurting yourself in the long run. So make sure you take breaks when you need them. And some final tips for scoring above a 515 on the MCAT. One is consistency is key. So you want to make sure that you're showing up for yourself and that you have a steady study schedule and that you're not cramming in the month before your test. Two is focusing on weaknesses. So if there's things that you really feel like you understand, don't spend any more time reviewing the content and spend extra time on subjects that you find challenging. And three is practicing with a purpose. You have a limited amount of practice tests, so you want to make sure that you are getting something out of it when you're doing it, whether it's practicing whether or not you can sit down and take a test for 4 hours, whether it's practicing if you can answer these questions quickly enough within each section, or if it's testing whether or not you can apply the content. And like, let's say you realize that you have a major content review issue, I would hold back on taking another practice test until you feel like you've covered those areas, and then go back and give it another try.
Awesome. Okay, so this is when I hop right back in. We have about 15 minutes or so for Q&A. I don't see any questions right now, but please, start getting those questions in. Somebody earlier did ask, is there a way we can get access to this PowerPoint after? Yes, you will receive a copy of this recording, and you'll be able to see the PowerPoint and everything that sort of comes along with it. We'll also be sharing a ton of resources, including practice tests, study guides, blog posts, you name it. We'll make sure that we give you as much information as possible. So, Ruchi, I wanted to ask you, and I think this is always a really common question that we get around the MCAT, is how early should someone even begin prepping? How early should someone begin studying?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that kind of depends on how you do on your first practice test, and then how what your goal score is. If those two things are really far apart, I would give yourself a lot of time to study. I would say choosing a date that's at least 3 months in the future, I think is a good amount of wiggle room. So if there's other things that come up, if you're still in school and if you're studying for classes, which I also did at the same time as doing my MCAT, you still have enough time to study before the test and not get stressed out.
Awesome. I think this is a great segue to the next question, which is how should I start studying?
That's a really good question. I hate this part, but there is no better way to start studying than taking a full-length practice exam. And that can be really disheartening in the beginning because you're going to be a long way off than where you will eventually be. But I think that's a good way to start identifying where you should start your content review or what might be the most difficult for you after the test. If there's a certain section that you felt really poorly about, there's different resources that are specific to that section. Like there's a really great 100-page document for Psych Soc that was all I used to study. Or there's some online resources for cars that are better than others. So if there's a section where you feel like you're significantly weaker, starting with a practice test can help you decide which kind of content you need to review first. Or if you realize that you're not answering these questions quickly enough, then you can start with a lot of timed passages to practice to get you started.
And I'd love to add in that if this goes out to our audience, if we aren't, explaining something properly, or you'd like us to just clarify a point or even add on to your question, please feel free. That's what we're here for. This is a really great question. Jennifer asks, what should we do if we aren't seeing any progress? Do you have any tips and tricks on how to overcome a stagnant period?
Ooh, that's a really good question. It's hard. It depends on how long the stagnant period is. Like if you're not seeing improvement right away, that could mean that you actually are improving and that you are learning more content, but each practice exam that you're looking at is just testing different areas. So if you feel like you're really like flatlining after a while, there's two things I would recommend. One is taking a full break where you don't think about the MCAT at all and you hang out with your friends and do something that totally gets your mind off of studying, and then go back and try again. So it could be a burnout issue. I think the second thing is sometimes I feel like there's some like peer pressure to use resources that really work for other people, but might not work for you. So if you're using the 7 Kaplan books, and let's say it's just you're not it doesn't help your reading comprehension, or it's not worded in such a way that like helps you learn the content for the exam, drop it, try something else, give that a go for like let's say 2 weeks, and then retake a section specific test or a full length and see if that helps.
Awesome. Jennifer, let us know if that answered your question. Let me give everyone a minute to continue getting these questions in. Jennifer says, yes, thank you so much. You're very welcome, Jennifer. That's what we're here for. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about sort of your own personal experiences with studying, or any sort of tips or tricks that we may not necessarily have covered during the presentation.
Yeah, like I said, I think the 100-page psychosocial review is really helpful. For cars, there's really nothing that you can specifically like learn. I think that the only way to get better at cars is to read as much as possible. And then I also think reading in your free time is also helpful. It doesn't always have to be the cars passages to get better at the cars section. And then I would say the chemistry and physics section is the most content-based, in my opinion. I also think the biology section is a lot of super basic biology concepts, but they're just applied in a very experimental way. So I think each section is kind of tackled in a different way. I think test anxiety was like a much bigger issue than I thought it would be. I think that it just feels like there's a lot writing on this test. Truthfully, there's like a ton of people that were admitted to my school with all sorts of different scores. So I really do think that the med school admissions process is actually holistic, and I don't think that any one part of your application is going to kill you or save you. But the first time I took the MCAT, I completely freaked out and ended up like canceling my test just because got I got a much more physics heavy first section than I thought I would, and then I was still thinking about it during my car section, so then I was like slower than I thought I would be, and then I just got really freaked out for the rest of the exam. So the second time I actually like sat down, took it for a score, and it went so much better because every time there was something that I didn't know, I just like forced myself to like mentally move on from it and not ruminate on that passage. So getting to know yourself and being honest with yourself if it's just an anxiety issue, because that can actually be a lot harder to overcome. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't think that I was totally honest with myself during the time practice exams. I think that I would take a lot more breaks than were actually allowed, which I didn't do when I sat for it the second time.
Awesome. I love all these questions and all this discussion. So Hannah asks, where do you recommend getting study materials?
Oh, that's a good question. The what I personally used was the Kaplan series, because I just personally like the textbook form better at that time. But I also let me look up all the names because I think it's like Jack Weston for cars. I use that a lot, and I thought that was really great. And then like that 100-page document for psych-soc, I also thought was really good. But I did take the MCAT like 4 years ago, so those materials might have changed a little bit. But I think Reddit is a really great place to go for advice. They have a lot of the resources that I ended up using, and they're organized in a very neat way. So there's an MCAT subreddit that I personally found really helpful.
Fantastic. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I think I'll let everyone give everyone a minute or two to just drop in those final thoughts. Do you have any advice on the application process?
Yeah, I think for the application process in general, I think that if there is a special point of your application, if there's something that you're really passionate about that helps you stand out, I think highlighting that as much as possible instead of thinking too much about what a certain school like wants from you, I think is important. I think I think that med school is kind of shaped in a way where it feels like it's such a crapshoot to get in, and that you should be so honored if you get an interview offer from any school. But you guys are all extremely talented and are going to be amazing doctors in the future, and you are all really special, and you have a lot to offer all the schools that you're interviewing to. So I think being able to identify what helps you be special and what stands out and make that really easy for your reader to understand, I think is important. And the MCAT is one way that you can show your academic readiness, because med school is hard and does require a lot of studying, but that's not the only way that you can show them that you're dedicated to studying. So don't make this exam bigger or more important than it actually is. And just remember that you are going to be an amazing applicant.
I'd love to follow up with one question. So obviously the goal is to get the best MCAT score possible. That goes without saying. But a question that I find we often get, and I think it might be helpful for the audience to sort of understand this portion of it is for some reason you don't necessarily get the best of the best score. You tried your best, that's it. Can you still get into your dream school even if you don't necessarily get the best score possible?
Yeah, that is such a good question. I think that depending on what your score is, that might affect how many quote unquote safety schools versus dream schools you apply to. But let's say your like life's goal was to go to Harvard and you love everything about their program, you should definitely send your application in no matter what. One thing that I found really helpful was the MSAR. So it shows you the bottom 10th percentile and the top 10th percentile. So I think having a score that's in between that range for most of the schools you're applying for is great. But for example, at Yale, I think the 10th percentile was a 518 or something super high. I have so many friends that go to Yale that got like a 502 or a 504. And obviously there were other parts of their application that helped them stand out. So if there's a school that you really love going, that you would really love to go to, I would definitely send in your application no matter what. But I would say depending on like financial and time constraints, maybe limit how many of those schools you're applying to based on how high your score is. But a low MCAT score won't stop you from getting into the school of your dreams.
Looks like we have a question regarding interviews, and I think this is really interesting. I love all these questions, by the way. So what kind of interview questions will they ask if you get interviewed? Can you share some examples? Before I pass it off to you, Ruchi, I just want to let this person know, and I'll make sure I include this in your follow-up. We just did a webinar all about MM and sort of we went over questions and examples of responses, et cetera, et cetera. So I will make sure we pass that off as well. That way, anybody who's interested in interview questions and the interview side of the, med school application, we'll make sure that gets done.
Okay, awesome. That is a really good question. I think, first of all, it depends on what the interview style of that school is. So if it's MMI, it could be virtually about anything. Some of the questions are like medical ethics related, like you guys might have been exposed to already. And then sometimes you might have behavioral MMI questions. MMI interviews were not that common at the schools that I applied to. Actually all of my interviews were traditional interviews. So it was way more conversational than I thought it would be. So it was a lot of just like natural back and forth with my interviewer. Sometimes you'll be asked like standardized questions that they keep a secret and they use new ones every interview cycle. So for example, one of the ones that I had at Yale was we had like a traditional interview where it was just like a normal back and forth with someone. And then there was a formal section where they asked 3 standardized questions. And one of them was, tell us about a time that a person came with you with a problem that you felt was inconsequential, and why did you feel it was inconsequential? So you might get some tougher, like kind of ethical questions like that. Another really common question that I got that I don't think enough people prepare for is they'll always like open the interview by saying like, tell me about yourself, but they almost always end the interview by asking what else you want the admissions committee to know. And I think that's something that almost no one prepares for ahead of time. And every time I had an interview, they wrote down what I said word for word on the feedback document. So I think preparing for that and having a one-liner to say at the end of your interview is really important. Keeping don't memorize anything for your interviews, but keep a list of things that you want to make sure you bring up, like all of the most impressive parts of your application or all the things that are really important to you, and make sure you hit on all of those things during your interview. And let's say one of those things doesn't come up, you can mention that at the end. Or if you did talk about everything that you wanted to talk about, just have a one sentence that like summarizes all those things together. And then the last thing I would say about interviews is there's almost always like a why do you want to go to this school question, which is also really important. So what I would do in like the 15 minutes before my interview is look up like specific clubs or specific researchers, or figure out whatever made that school special and bring that up during your interview. But most people who get offered an interview ultimately get in. So the stats are like 30% to 50%, depending on where you interview. So being normal is also really important. And a lot of your interviewers may also be med students. So if you have a student interviewer, it will probably be super chill. And all the people that they choose to be interviewers are pretty much always volunteers, so they like want to be there and they want to talk to you. So interviewing was like a lot more relaxed than I thought it would be.
Awesome. Okay. So this one is really interesting too. And I feel like I keep repeating it, but genuinely. And I've never had somebody bring this up in a Q&A session. This individual asks, how was the matching process to medical schools?
Oh, that is an interesting question. There isn't a match when you apply to med school, so you can get accepted to like 10 med schools and then pick whichever one you want. Um, the matching process is more for residencies because you can only get into one residency program. But for if you mean like making a decision about your med school, once you get, it might be a little different for you guys because all of your interviews are virtual, but I had to like fly out for each interview. So if you get into a school and you get a really good like scholarship or financial aid package, and you know that you would go to this school over the other ones, I would just deny the interview invite. I think you can accept it if you feel like you need more practice, but after a while, you might be overwhelmed by how many schools want you and how many interview offers you get. So it's okay to start rejecting those interview offers after a while. Um, by April 15th, you can only have an offer of admission from like one school, and then you can stay on like other wait lists. So I would try to, I got most of my acceptances in February. So you have a couple of months to decide and weigh the pros and cons and look at your financial aid package and stuff before that April 15th deadline. And then after that, you can stay on wait lists. Some people get off the wait list super late. I had someone that we signed a lease with, and then she got off the wait list for Columbia. So you can get off that wait list basically any day up until classes start. But you can only keep one offer of admission until April 15th.
Fantastic. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. I'll give everyone just a minute to any last minute thoughts. In the meantime, thank you for having us. I think this has been such a pleasure, and we are here to support you guys in any sort of way. Each of you would have received a confirmation email. If you have any additional questions after this webinar, please do not hesitate to just respond back. If I don't know the question, or sorry, the answer myself, I will make sure I speak to Ruchi or somebody else on our admissions team to be able to get you the proper clarification that you need. Again, thank you very much for having us. I don't see any questions or additional questions in the chat, so I think this is a really great time to wrap up. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and we're looking forward to the next webinar. Thank you so much for having us tonight.
Thanks, guys.